The sun was setting in Pine Hollow, painting the sky orange and red hues as it cast long shadows over the small town. Nestled among pine-covered hills, Pine Hollow was a haven of tranquility where residents knew each other by name, and life moved at a serene pace. But that peace was about to be disturbed in a terrifying way. In recent months, a shadow had fallen over the village. A disturbing phenomenon began to occur: unexplained disappearances. People simply disappeared without a trace, as if the night darkness swallowed them. Fear began to spread among the inhabitants of Pine Hollow, who now avoided each other's gaze, fearful that the next victim could be their neighbor, friend, or relative. The local sheriff, Frank Henderson, was perplexed. Witness accounts were vague and full of shadows, murmurs, and fleeting appearances that made no sense. He had no experience dealing with supernatural cases, but something sinister and inexplicable was happening in his town. The situation was getting out of his control, and he felt he needed help. It was at that moment that Henderson remembered his old friend, David Mitchell, a homicide detective known for his determination and exceptional investigative skills. Mitchell had solved complex cases in big cities, but had never faced anything like the disappearances that plagued Pine Hollow. With an urgent phone call, Henderson summoned his friend to help investigate the disappearances that were plaguing the quiet town. Mitchell, driven by concern for his friend and curiosity, agreed to leave immediately toward Pine Hollow. The village, with its narrow streets and wooden houses, seemed out of place in time. Mitchell's arrival coincided with sunset, when shadows began to grow and darkness slowly crept into Pine Hollow. The inhabitants were reluctant to talk about the disappearances, their eyes avoiding contact with the new arrivals. Henderson explained to Mitchell the worrying situation. People were mysteriously disappearing without leaving any clues. There were no signs of a struggle, kidnapping, or tracks that could lead to a suspect. Witness accounts were confusing, full of rapidly moving shadows, as if the darkness were alive. Together, they began the investigation, starting with the abandoned homes of the missing victims. In the empty homes, they found personal items left behind, such as clothes, photographs, and diaries, but no signs of a struggle or invasion. The houses were intact, which made the situation even more mysterious. That night, as Mitchell and Henderson were going through the victims' documents in their makeshift police station, something unexpected happened. The lights began to flicker, and an agonized scream echoed through the halls. Henderson ran into the dark hallway, but Mitchell hesitated for a moment, sensing the presence of something evil in the air. When Mitchell finally ran into the hallway, he found his friend cornered by a black shadow that stretched from floor to ceiling. It was as if darkness itself had manifested itself and taken hold of Henderson. He tried to fight the dark entity, but was dragged into the darkness with a desperate scream. Screams of agony resounded throughout the police station before abruptly disappearing. Frank Henderson had disappeared without a trace. David Mitchell found himself alone, now solely responsible for unraveling the mysteries that plagued Pine Hollow. His determination to find his lost friend and the solution to the sinister disappearances drove him forward, despite the growing fear that was beginning to grip him. Pine Hollow had become a town shrouded in darkness, and the homicide detective was determined to confront the supernatural horror that tormented it. David Mitchell was alone in the small Pine Hollow police station, with the memory of his friend Frank Henderson's agonized scream echoing in his ears. The police station was now plunged into a gloomy silence, with the lights flickering faintly. Mitchell felt a chill run down his spine as the feeling that something was wrong only grew. He couldn't believe what he had seen. A black shadow, a supernatural entity, had dragged his friend into the darkness. It was something he couldn't understand, something that didn't fit into his rational view of the world. But now he was alone, with the responsibility of unraveling the mysteries that tormented Pine Hollow. The first thing Mitchell did was examine the scene where Henderson had disappeared. There was no physical evidence of that dark entity that had taken over his friend. There were no footprints, no traces of struggle, nothing that could explain what had happened. The darkness of the night outside the police station was deep, and the feeling that something sinister was lurking began to envelop him. He grabbed a flashlight and left the police station to look for clues. The streets of Pine Hollow were deserted. The houses were silent, as if the town was waiting in anticipation. It was an unsettling atmosphere, as if the darkness itself was watching. Mitchell decided to visit the homes of the victims of the disappearances. He searched rooms and attics, looking for hidden clues that could shed light on the mystery. However, what he found disturbed him even more. In the dark corners of the rooms, he discovered hand-drawn drawings depicting black shadows that crept over the victims as they slept. The drawings were disturbing with stunning detail. They appeared to have been made by trembling, frightened hands, as if the witnesses had felt the need to document the horror they experienced. Mitchell wondered if these drawings were a sign of the shadows of death that haunted Pine Hollow. As the night wore on, Mitchell continued his investigation, exploring each lead carefully. However, the darkness of the night seemed to become more intense, and he began to hear whispers and muffled laughter, as if something was watching him from within the shadows. The feeling that he was being watched and persecuted did not leave him. He returned to the police station, his mind swirling with doubts and fear. The darkness of the city was starting to get to him, and he began to question his own sanity. He had never dealt with supernatural cases, and the feeling of helplessness haunted him. The night was long, and tiredness mixed with restlessness. Mitchell knew he needed more information to understand what was happening in Pine Hollow. He grabbed a notepad and started writing, recording every detail of the investigation so far. He was determined to find answers, to find his friend and to solve the mystery plaguing the city. As he wrote, the feeling that something was watching him continued to haunt him. The shadows on the walls of the police station seemed to writhe and dance, as if they had a life of their own. Mitchell felt that he was on the verge of a breakthrough, but also that he was getting closer and closer to the abyss of madness. The night continued, and Mitchell's investigation was far from over. He knew that Pine Hollow was hiding dark secrets, and he was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. Darkness enveloped him, but he would not give up on finding answers and facing the supernatural horror that was about to be revealed. David Mitchell had spent the night at the Pine Hollow police station, fighting the darkness that seemed to want to swallow him. The whispers and muffled laughter that echoed through the room didn't let him rest, and the feeling that something was watching him continued to haunt him. The next morning, Mitchell decided to continue his investigation in the city. He knew he needed more information to understand what was happening in Pine Hollow, and perhaps find a way to rescue his missing friend, Frank Henderson. Martha, a brave local who had approached Mitchell the night before, offered her help. She was one of the few willing to face the horrors that haunted the town and possessed knowledge of Pine Hollow's dark history. Mitchell accepted her help willingly, knowing he would need all the information available. Martha told the detective about an old legend that her grandmother used to tell, the legend of the shadows of death. According to the story, these dark entities were creatures that fed on people's lives, stealing their souls to feed their eternal desire for darkness. Although the legend was considered folklore by the inhabitants of Pine Hollow, the current circumstances seemed eerily similar. Mitchell didn't know if he could believe the legend, but the inexplicable events he had witnessed made him consider any explanation, no matter how absurd it seemed. He and Martha began researching the history of Pine Hollow for clues that could help them understand the connection to the shadows of death. As they dug through the town's dusty historical records, they discovered that Pine Hollow had been founded by a religious sect in the 19th century. This sect was known for its religious fervor and its insatiable search for secrets from beyond. They performed dark rituals and invoked dark entities in their quest for power. The connection between Pine Hollow's dark past and mysterious disappearances began to become clearer. The legend of the shadows of death seemed to be related to the macabre practices of the ancient sect. Members of the sect believed that the shadows of death were the guardians of the forbidden knowledge they sought. These dark entities were summoned to ensure that the sect's macabre secrets remained hidden. The sect had mysteriously disappeared many years ago, but the curse they had evoked seemed to have survived. Pine Hollow, once a colony of religious fervor, was now paying the price for the sins of the past. The mysterious disappearances were, in some way, the continuation of the search for forbidden secrets. Mitchell and Martha realized that the only way to save the city and its people was to face the shadows of death directly. They dove into research, searching for a way to banish these evil entities once and for all. Pine Hollow's dark history was starting to make sense, but the horror they would face was far from over. Night fell over Pine Hollow, and the investigation was far from complete. Mitchell was determined to face his adopted town's dark past, rescue his missing friend, and banish the shadows of death that had terrorized Pine Hollow for generations. The battle against supernatural horror was about to enter its darkest and most challenging stage. But Mitchell and Martha were determined to face it, no matter the price they had to pay. David Mitchell and Martha's investigation had led them to uncover the sinister connection between Pine Hollow's dark past and mysterious disappearances. They were determined to face the shadows of death that had haunted the city for generations and rescue Frank Henderson, who had been dragged into the darkness. After weeks of research and complex rituals, Mitchell and Martha have finally discovered an ancient method for confronting the shadows of death. They had prepared a sacred site in the center of Pine Hollow, where they intended to perform the ritual that would allow them to banish the dark entities once and for all. Night came, and the darkness was deep. They lit candles and began reciting ancient words, summoning the shadows of death for the final confrontation. As the words echoed in the air, black shadows began to materialize around them, writhing like dark serpents. The entity's eyes shone with a sinister glow. The battle that followed was terrible. The shadows of death tried to drag them into the darkness, casting themselves upon them like ravenous shadows. Mitchell and Martha fought with determination, using the ancient knowledge they had gained to weaken the entities. The candles flickered, illuminating the macabre scene of struggle and despair. The air was charged with static electricity, and the darkness seemed to come to life, as if it were fighting to protect its prey. Mitchell felt the darkness trying to penetrate his mind, searching for his fears and weaknesses. With one final effort, Mitchell and Martha joined forces and released a blast of light, channeling the power of ancient words and forbidden knowledge. The shadows of death were struck by the light and began to dissolve into black smoke. High-pitched, agonizing screams echoed through the air as the dark entities disappeared, leaving Pine Hollow finally at peace. The city was freed from the darkness that had haunted it for so long. The missing were never found, but the curse that had consumed Pine Hollow had been broken. Mitchell said goodbye to Martha and thanked her for her courage and invaluable help. He promised that he would never forget the terrible battle against supernatural horror. However, the experience had left deep scars on Mitchell. The darkness still haunted him, and he knew he would never be the same. Pine Hollow once again became a peaceful place, but the memories of the supernatural nightmare would never be erased. As the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the town, Pine Hollow seemed to have been transformed. The feeling of fear and apprehension was gone, replaced by a sense of relief and hope. The city could finally start over and leave the horrors of the past behind. David Mitchell looked up at the sunrise, knowing he'd faced the unknown and emerged victorious. However, he knew that the darkness would still haunt him, and the battle against the supernatural horror would never be forgotten. Pine Hollow had once again become a place of peace, but its narrow streets and wooden houses still carried the memory of the supernatural nightmare that had haunted the town for so long. The fight against the shadows of death had been won, but the scars from that battle would remain forever.